everybody. I'm Deborah Piguet. Welcome to Winning with Deborah, where people turn to learn. Have you learned all you need to know legally and financially to assure your physical well-being during your golden years? Or perhaps you are a family caregiver, but may not be in the loop on the state of affairs for your parent or other relative that you have assumed care for. Many people of faith bury their heads in the sand and say, God will take care of it. But Proverbs 22:3 says, a prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes on blindly and suffers the consequences. Trust me, there are some costly consequences that you could experience if you choose to remain ignorant about the critical issues of being or caring for the elderly. My guest today is an expert in these matters, and she is on a mission to make sure that you are in the know so that you can develop sound strategies for dealing with legal and financial issues that can crop up. Attorney Caprice Collins is the founder of the Collins Law Group in Inglewood, California. She's a top-rated Harvard Law School trained an attorney with over 3 decades of experience in wills and living trusts and estate planning and business planning. She is passionate about empowering people with the knowledge to plan wisely. She offers free estate planning seminars in the Los Angeles area on a regular basis. And she's here today to talk about the legal pitfalls for family caregivers. This is really important, so get your pencil and your paper and get ready. Attorney Collins, welcome to Winning with Deborah.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for having me this morning.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and I just want to appreciate the fact that you are so giving, generous with your time to the community, and you should have gotten some special recognition for that already. Well, I'd like to get started with a biblical basis for our discussion, and today I want to start with Proverbs 22:3. I just want to slow it down. I mentioned it in my intro, but I want to go over it very closely because it says a prudent person foresees danger, and takes precautions, but the simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. I am personally probably still in the midst of some consequences of things not being done exactly the way they should have been, and we don't want you to have to experience that. So we're going to try to really highlight these pitfalls today, and I know that's going to be very empowering for you. So, Attorney Collins, let's just get right into these pitfalls. One of the first pitfalls is that children are ignorant of their parents' medical condition or other situations.
Well, Deborah, you know, the real issue here is that those types of things, in other words, whether our parent has maybe cognitive decline or another medical condition that could affect their ability to care for themselves properly, is really the basis for most caregiving decisions. So being in the know, being observant, I would say, is probably the most important thing a person can do. To see the changes, perhaps, in the way our parent is living their life. Are they now very messy when they were very, very tidy and clean all of their lives? Do they
Wait a minute, is that a sign that something's going on?
That, amongst other signs, can be things that can be evidence of cognitive decline.
Really?
But most common, I think, we see is forgetfulness. That's usually what first comes up, is that we're having a conversation with someone and then maybe we come back to a point and they don't remember what we talked about a few minutes before. I just really encourage you, when you go visit your mom or dad, look around, look at things in the home, see if whether there's past due bills, see whether or not there's medication you'd never seen before, perhaps, being taken by your parent. And ask your parent if you can attend their doctor's visits with them. It's a great way to understand what your parent's medical condition is, and to be able to assist them. Perhaps there's changes that need to be made in the home that would enable them to stay there, because the reality is that most of our family members want to remain in their home. That's usually their most sincere intent.
But you started with a big assumption, and that is that people are visiting their parents. Don't you think people are just kind of a little too busy these days?
Well, I'll be very honest with you. I think it's a combination of being busy and not wanting to take responsibility.
Oh.
Because when you really go and you notice that something's wrong, then most of us have to do something about it. And so if we notice that our parent is not driving the same way they used to, we see scuffs on the car, tickets, other things, then maybe we're going to have to start driving them or arranging for Uber. So part of it is maybe we're detached from the parent, maybe we don't live in the same community anymore, but part of it may be that we just don't want the responsibility.
Now, you have some personal experience in this area, having taken care of your mother. Just kind of share that experience with us.
Well, I was blessed with a wonderful woman as my mom. My mom had me later in life at age 42.
Wow.
So by the time that I was in my 40s, my mother was in her 80s. And I was definitely one of those sandwich generation people where I had a mom in her 80s and children in their teens. So
That's
I
stressful.
was, yeah, I had a lot of responsibility. And so at the first incidents where I noticed that my mother needed some help was when my mother's insurance company, car insurance company, called me and told me that my mother no longer would have car insurance. And I said to them, why? And they said, because your mother no longer has a driver's license.
Oh.
And I went to my mother and I said, Mom, you know, what's going on? And she basically told me that she'd gone to the DMV to take her test and she had failed it.
Oh.
And this is the thing that made me know for sure, Deborah, that my mother didn't need to drive anymore and there was real problems with her thinking. She said to me, what's the big deal? There are people who don't have insurance, don't have driver's licenses, and they drive their cars every day.
Oh, was she planning to continue to drive without the license?
This was not my mother. My mother was not
okay.
a dishonest person. My mother was a law-abiding person. My mother had assets.
Okay.
So when my mother made that comment that was completely out of character with her thought and with her life, I knew there was something wrong.
Well, suppose the parent is very private. You know, you want to be in the know, but some parents don't want you to know. You know, they don't want certain kids to know because they know they're little takers, and so they don't tell anybody. So, I mean, what's somebody to do?
Well, I think there's a point in which all of us children have to man up.
Yeah.
Okay? I think there's a point where we have to accept that maybe we are the parent now.
Yeah.
I hate to think that way, and we hate to think that way because we never want to give up of being the child, okay?
Yeah.
But the reality is if we really truly love that person and we realize that, you know, if we don't take the consequences of maybe disrupting their lives and having that hard conversation, that very drastic things could happen. I don't know if you remember that situation in a nearby community, Santa Monica, a few years back, where an elderly gentleman ran through the farmer's market and ended up killing like 20 people and injuring scores of others.
Oh, man.
And his family knew that he should not have been driving anymore. And because they wanted to avoid that difficult conversation, or in my belief, Deborah, what they really wanted to avoid was taking the responsibility for their dad and for moving him around. That's the worst case scenario that any of us could think of, but things happen like that.
And I think sometimes we're selfish in that we try to protect ourselves from just the pain of watching that. Because when my mom was going through dementia, and she's passed away now, but one of my brothers said, I just can't stand seeing her that way, so I don't visit her.
Well, it's such a, I think what happens is that when we do take that kind of attitude, we regret it, that after our parent has passed and we think about that last end of their lives and what we could have just gained from being in their presence and from giving them the love, that we regret it. So hard choices have to be made.
And I like the word regret because I try to live with no regrets towards my mom. And I think that's important, that you can just serve your parents in such a way that when they pass away, you know, you don't regret it. And because my mom did have the dementia, I felt like I lost her. So I had to grieve the loss of the person I used to know. But let's look at another pitfall, another one that you have highlighted. The caregiver doesn't have a valid health care power of attorney. So the caregivers has pretty much is handcuffed in terms of how much they can do. Talk about that.
Well, a healthcare power of attorney is a document that allows a person you trust to make medical decisions for you if you can't make them sometime in your life. That could be as simple as just being hospitalized for an accident. I had an accident. I was hospitalized for some period of time. I was under pain medication. And honestly, the decisions need to be made by another about what procedure would be done on me. So it could be very temporary, but most often it's when people have started the effects of dementia or suffering from it, and just normal decisions need to be made like medication procedures, whether someone would go into a nursing home, go into rehab. These are all things that we want someone we trust to be able to do for us in the case of an emergency.
And that power of attorney also covers some end of life type decisions like don't revive me or whatever, because my dad had that, and I thought, But they still asked me anyway, even though he had it in writing. Now, what was that about?
Well, it differs from state to state.
Oh, because this was in Texas.
And a lot of people in various other states refer to what we call a living will. And a living will is that. It's a document that contains your end-of-life choices. In most states, what the end-of-life choices are, whether or not we would want at the end of our life. And that's when we're in a condition where basically we're terminal. And we're not going to get any better. There's no medicine, there's no procedure that's going to change our condition. And we're unconscious.
But wait a minute, a living will, now that's not the same as a regular will. So a living will, should one only get that when you have a terminal illness? Do you get it after you know you have a terminal illness, or is this something you should have in place?
Well, a living will is a document that is in certain states. In our state, we don't have living wills. We just have that advanced healthcare directive.
Okay.
And that's a power of attorney for making temporary decisions. And then the living will is your decision, or your last decision about your end-of-life choices. And then in California, it's in one document.
Okay. Okay.
And so basically what we would say is, do I want to be on life support? Do I want to be placed on a respirator? Do I want to be placed on a feeding tube? If I'm never going to recover, if it's just going to extend my life artificially, is that the way that I want my life to end? Or would I just want to naturally be left in a position for the disease to take its course? Most of the times we're going to do that with pain medication. We're never going to have someone in extreme pain, but we're not going to extend their lives through artificial means.
So you should what would you want to do? Would you want your life extended?
No.
Me either.
No.
I don't think living is just breathing. I don't have my mind and quality of life just like, pull the plug, let me go and be with Jesus.
This is the last place where we can actually guard our dignity. Really, if you think about it, when we are completely unable to say what we want to happen to us, where there are in many cases family members fighting over what should happen. This is where many families unfortunately split up and never come back together. When mom, is in a position where maybe a feeding tube would keep her alive, but family members know that's not what their parent would want, and they duke it out. I've had some medical professionals tell me that they have actually had family members come to fisticuffs
goodness.
in the hallways of hospitals and medical centers over this decision. So whatever your desire is, and there's no right or wrong choice, sweetie, on this, if you want everything that could possibly be done, or you want a natural end of life, it's your decision, and let your decision be honored, and that's what we have the right to do in our healthcare powers of attorney.
Now, I would dare say a very small percentage of the population would have a living will. Is that something that most people have never heard of?
Well, most people actually nowadays are being encouraged by their medical providers. You'll generally find that when you enter hospital nowadays, or even the prudent, as you talk about, even the prudent medical provider will ask that their patients actually have these documents way in advance. When you enter in certain states, certain kinds of care, like you were talking about things that may related to your dad, when you enter a nursing home, family members are encouraged at that time to do a more detailed document that indicates what they would want. Would they want pain medication, but not any other kind of assistance at end of life, where you can get very, very specific. So it really is state-based. In other words, some states will provide this, but most of the times nowadays, when we enter some kind of formal care, there will be a request that you sign documents indicating what your wishes are.
Now, speaking of entering into formal care, that can get to be pretty pricey. And so a lot of times, one of the pitfalls we have is that the elder person may run out of resources, and you may have to seek help from the government. And so you have to have a plan for that.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, first of all, let me just clarify what we're talking about, because many people, most of us over the age of 65, have Medicare. So Medicare is a program for elders who paid into the government system, paid through their taxes on their wages, for the right to have medical care at 65 be subsidized or paid for by the U.S. government. That all of us should, of course, have available to us. But Medicare only covers certain things, and what most people don't realize is that Medicare doesn't cover long-term care. And long-term care consists of the following: care in your house. It can consist of assisted living, going to assisted living, It can even consist of adult daycare, where you're just away from the home for a certain amount of hours a day, and it definitely consists of nursing home care. That is not covered by Medicare. So often, unfortunately, people fail to plan this way. They don't give attention to this, and what happens at a point when all of a sudden maybe a stroke or dementia has occurred, resources are not available, and they end up on the program we refer to as Medicaid, which is a national program that is there to help the indigent, people who don't have the ability to pay for their own care. In our state, we call it Medi-Cal, but the national program that supplies all the funds is Medicaid.
Oh, I'm glad you made that distinction, because I'm like, what is I knew Medi-Cal was California because I've known people who had to use those services, but I didn't know how that kind of tied into the national program. So it kind of funds the California Medi-Cal. Okay, all right. So now, so it's for people who don't have much money. Suppose you have a house, you just don't have any cash.
Well, that's interesting you ask about that, because in most cases, you only have to qualify by your assets as it relates to non-residents and things of that sort.
Wait, so slow that down a little bit. So if I can have a house,
yes,
but if I don't have any, I can't have rental properties and stocks.
No.
Okay.
No, you're limited to $2,000 worth of financial assets other than your home in most states.
That's nothing.
Yes, and as good stewards, we're taught that we're supposed to start at a very early age and starting to plan not to be in that situation. But unfortunately, that's the law. You can't have more than $2,000 worth of bank accounts, stock, paid up life insurance, all of that.
Okay, so it's for the poor.
It's for the poor.
Okay.
But you could have a house of any value.
They won't make you sell it?
Nope.
So if I live in $1 million house, but I have $2 in the bank, I can qualify.
Yes, it's kind of unlikely that you'd be in that situation, though, wouldn't it? You know, that you'd have a million
But maybe you moved into it a zillion years ago and it's appreciated, but the net is you don't have any cash available for this long-term care, so the government will help you. Now, would they make you pay it back once you die or something?
Well, this is really a little more complicated than that, and that is that most of people are in that position of having $2 in the bank in $1 million house, okay? They are in a position where they do have something in the bank, and so the family is put in a position at that time of trying to figure out how do we navigate this system so that my parent, yes, can still avail themselves of what they need, which is probably a nursing home stay. In our state, it costs $10,000 a month to have quality nursing home care.
$10,000 a month?
A month. So very quickly, someone could run through their life savings with that. So most families are put in a situation where they have spent all their money down. We call it spend down, where maybe you are trying to help your mom and she has assorted accounts, banks, credit unions, paid up life, insurance, stock accounts, and you've spent that money. You've spent all that money over a number of years to keep your mother in her home or help her with assisted living or whatever, and then all of a sudden it gets to the point where the money's run out. And now you have to avail yourself of Medicaid. Okay. The rules are that you can get on Medicaid if you have a home and can be, in our state, of any value.
Wow.
However, at the end of that person's life, every dollar that was ever spent will be recovered, meaning it will be due and payable back.
Wait a minute. So if the person did have a house, whatever amount of money they got from the government, because I know somebody who just had this situation, they'll use that house to pay it back, to sell it. But if you can find it from another source, you don't have to sell the house. The net is that they want their money back.
Exactly. And that's why they leave the house in your name. So it's a kind of diabolical reason, you know, that you get a chance to keep your home because of the fact the reality is they want the home to be available to pay back the government at the end of the life.
Oh, that's why they let you have it.
Correct.
Okay, I'm not trying to be dishonest here, but I'm just asking. Okay, suppose you transfer that to another relative so that you don't have a house. You just transfer it. I think I know the answer, but I want you to tell my audience.
Well, the government requires you, when you make the application for that care, that you declare everything you had up to almost 60 months or 5 years prior to the application. Oh. So the problem is, if you didn't give that house away 5 years, like you had a crystal ball and knew you were going to need to do that, then you're going to be disqualified. So when you give your assets away to people, you would disqualify yourself from getting the care at all.
But if you like the scripture says, a wise man foresees the evil and takes refuge. Suppose right now, when I think I'm in good health, pretty good. But suppose I were to do it right now, but because I don't have any idea when I'm going to need it. So if I were to do it, and then 7 years from now I really need it. So that look back period, that 5-year look back period, I wouldn't be subject to any scrutiny because I did it way back here.
That's correct. But why would you want to give away your most valuable asset to someone else who you may not be able to control? So once you did that, once you gave it away to your daughter or your son,
I just want them to hold it in escrow for me.
Unfortunately,
that's not how it works.
No, it'd have to be in their name.
And then
they
their
could
name.
sell it. They could borrow on it. They could get in an accident. It could be jeopardized.
Oh, it could be jeopardized because if you. And help us out, because sometimes we just don't know. But if I were to give it to, I don't know, my brother, and I trust him and say, hold this house, and you know it's not your house, I'm just doing this, right? But that's dishonest, isn't it?
Well, it's not necessarily dishonest, but it could disqualify you. The proper thing in our state is simply put the property in a living trust.
Oh.
You remain in full control of your own property. You can borrow on it, sell it, do whatever might be necessary in your lifetime, and guess what? The government cannot come back and get a dime out of that home.
Get out of here.
That's right.
I didn't know that.
There's a real simple solution.
Oh, so you put the house in the living trust.
That's right. So there's planning that can be done in all of these cases. I would just really encourage people to really think very strongly about getting long-term care insurance.
Oh, wow.
That's really the solution.
It's so expensive. And if you haven't gotten it by the time you're 55, the rates are really high, right?
There's a lot of different ways to buy long-term care insurance.
Oh, really?
Yes,
What's the cheapest way?
The cheapest way is to buy it early, like you mentioned.
Yeah, right.
But what I would recommend most people to do is to dedicate a certain amount of money to it. So let's say, for instance, I'm going to save $100,000. And a lot of different kinds of insurance products nowadays, that $100,000 can become $400,000 when you need it for long-term care.
Really?
Yes.
I want to talk to you about that after the show. Okay, so you can buy insurance for that and put it in some kind of a vehicle where it grows to that. Okay, that sounds good. Now that's a great transition to pitfall number 4, is that we talked about the living trust, and this is even more critical for an elderly person to have a living trust. Yes. So talk about that some more now with respect to elderly people.
Okay, well, what I think I'd like to emphasize here is by having planning in place, what we can do is we can prevent something that we see happening right now prolifically throughout the community, and that is elder abuse. When we have nobody we've given trust to, when we have no one that we have a relationship with in that regard, we open the door for abuse. We open the door for people to take advantage of us at very many different levels. So I would just encourage, if you have a relationship, whether it's with your child, a sibling, a cousin, a nephew, someone that you know loves you and you love them, to take advantage of planning early on. And have that person be aware that you've done this planning and be alert to you so that we can avoid it, because without this, people end up falling in the pitfalls of people borrowing on their home. I don't know if you know this, but right now in our location, there is an entire government bureaucracy just dedicated to overturning fraudulent transfers of people's homes.
What?
So elderly people will have a caregiver come in, and that person could be turned out to be dishonest and will forge their signature to their to sell their home to another party and basically leave the person homeless. This is going on a lot, and so the best way to prevent this is to have planning in place that would prevent someone from being able to take advantage of you.
Oh, wow. Now, can you do your own living trust?
Do you go to your own doctor? I mean, do you do surgery on yourself when you need it?
I'm bad about self-diagnosing things. No, but you don't recommend that. Because
Not at all.
there are online programs. And
Yeah.
I like what you said earlier about this, the fact that a professional is really needed. Because each state is so unique until there may be terms or whatever that you would put in it based on a template that you got online that would totally void it in some other state or whatever. Talk about that.
You don't know what you don't know. And people go to law school, and people become accountants, and people become doctors because there's a level of knowledge that is necessary for the practice of their profession. So going online, using a program, and assuming that now you have that level of knowledge is unrealistic. And laws change all the time. Are you supposed to know that? And then think about this. When you would have that situation, whether it be a sudden slip or fall or a medical situation, is your family member supposed to come to you? You in the hospital to understand what you did? Okay. No, you want a separate, reliable, licensed professional to stand behind those documents and to help your family.
You just made me think of something, and I like the advice. Do you recommend that a family member be the executor or whatever of a will, or that just seems like it just creates so many problems. I'm just almost convinced it should be an attorney. What do you say?
I say the real issue is the quality of the person you put in that position. It's not so much whether they're a family member or not. Okay. Now, if you don't have anyone that you have that confidence in, that you really don't feel within your immediate family, then yes, there are private fiduciaries, trust companies at financial institutions that are there to help families in those situations.
It's slipping my mind. I'm having a brain freeze. But what's that loan that elders can get on their house?
You're talking about a reverse mortgage.
Yes. I don't know what. Do you recommend that?
In certain cases.
Okay. Where you absolutely need the money.
Yes. My mother had a reverse mortgage at the end of her life.
Okay.
And so it's not something that I don't recommend, but it should be for very discrete reasons, like you want to stay in your home, you don't have money to support that, or you have medical conditions where you need long-term care, and having that would enable you. Yeah. But I would always recommend that we have good financial counseling through that process.
And they require it, don't they? You can't just get it just because you want it. I mean, I understand you have to go through a process as an elderly person.
I would not rely on that process. I'm talking about your own financial counselor that would really be attuned to your situation.
Okay. So what do you think? What kind of advice, if you had to just recommend something now in our last few minutes, what are some of your top pieces of advice for an elderly person?
Well, my first bit of advice is that everyone listening to this needs 3 documents. You do need your own financial power of attorney. You do need an advanced health care directive or other health care power of attorney. And you do need to let the persons that you trust know where these documents are so that they can avail themselves and help you. Now, if you have real property, you gotta have a living trust.
Okay. I think that's great. I thank you so much for coming here today. You are just so full of wisdom. I could just ask you questions all day.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I really highly recommend your services because you make it clear what's happening. And I know that you haven't told a bunch of your horror stories, but in your seminars, and I would highly recommend those seminars, where can people find you?
Just go to our website, www.collinslawgroup.com, and all of our seminars are there under seminars.
Under seminars. Yes. Okay, and they're great. They're usually at a library or somewhere, but it's a good thing to do, and I highly recommend it. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining our discussion on the legal pitfalls for family caregivers. Now, I pray that you now have greater clarity about this important topic and that you have been inspired to foresee the danger and take refuge. It may be uncomfortable to have that dreaded conversation about healthcare decisions and long-term care preferences, but if you are a caregiver, it's time to sit down with your parent or your relative and evaluate their situation. You must help them possibly face some realities that they may not have really wanted to face and may have their heads in the sand on, but maybe it's time they prepare, update their will, or get positioned financially to receive long-term care from the government. Whatever, the bottom line is that they must have a strategy. Attorney Collins consistently talked about the need for planning. Planning is biblical. We live by faith, but we plan, so that they can have access to the best quality care, or maybe you're that person, so that you can have access to the best quality care. So listen, we can do this, and I just really encourage you today to don't be penny wise and pound foolish. Get a qualified person to handle your affairs, and until I see you next time, have a winning week.